Welcome to the Book of Urm. Chapter 2. Sagery. Sagery. The freshly lit oil lamp bloomed to life, illuminating the old man's face into view from the dimness of the large study as he turned around to face Ravziz. She sat on an old weathered settee covered in furs, fabrics, and musty pillows, with Awator seated on the carpeted floor at her feet. He stood eye-level with her, as he was halfling kind, the little folk who lived in many villages and hamlets throughout Cananea. He had a large head with a bald top that peeked through a ring of thin grey hair that hung down below his ears in long tendrils. His kind, gentle old hazel eyes were the colour of a sea wave lit by the sun from behind. He had a pleasant face that was easy to trust, and his smile was both calming and invigorating. Anyone could fall in love with him at any moment and not be blamed for it, Ravziz thought to herself. His old leathery hands were overly large, as were his feet, upon which he wore comfortable black leather shoes that were polished to shine and laced up the front. They made his steps sound loud and heavy on the shop's wooden floor, as if he were someone twice his size. He wore grey trousers patterned with white vertical stripes, which both succeeded and failed to make him look taller, depending on the angle one viewed him. A loose white shirt, tucked haphazardly into his pants, billowed around his belly. 2 leather straps hooked through the top of his pants and looped around his shoulders. Suspenders, he called them. Brenzai design. 'Tis the trend right now, over there in Ilans on the coast of the western waters, he said, snapping one of the straps against his chest. They got 'em for the legs too. Women wear 'em to keep their leggings up, connected to a belt round the old belly. He gestured with his hands around his own stomach while looking at Ortor, then giggled. I swear, we can't keep up with the Brenzage or your muthans for that matter, can we? Way out in front of us ye are, with your tricks with steam, black rock and oil. Oh, the machines that are being made o'er there. We're not muthan, Lord Rultin, said Ravziz, not impolitely, but gently reminding him of the sensitivity that exists when conflating one's nationality with their heritage, especially with the Unskavia. He bowed, slapped the top of his bald head, and said, Forgive an old dolt, m'lady, for wanting to cut his own tongue off while it flaps round on its own. Indeed you're not. Indeed, you most certainly are not. Have you been to Bren's? Asked Ravziza. Nah, haven't really been anywhere, really. Lived my whole life as a Havener. But seems the world comes to me, done it? He chuckled again. Here, let me pour you something. He turned away and walked over to a small wooden bar along a wall beneath a large tapestry that illustrated a large battle between humans and what Ravziz guessed to be monsters of goblin kind. The landscape was that of tall, snow-capped mountains with a large body of water in their midst. That artwork above you, is that the Crystal Sea? She asked. Rultin glanced over his shoulder at her, over the sounds of clinking glass. You're knowledgeable of our lands. Aye, that there be the Crystal Sea and the impassable mountains at Erith August, our northern border. What is the battle? What happened there? She asked. He turned to face her, holding 2 small glasses of deep red wine. Then he turned to face the tapestry and gestured with one of his hands holding the wine. Well, these here be the Southrons, the ones who came o'er the salt sea from unknown lands, the ones who founded Canonia. During the time of city building, the northern mountains emptied with a host of goblins and trolls, orcs and ogres and giants, and many other aspects of filth. This be the War of the North, the Goblin War, and so on. Many names. But do you see here? He pointed to an area at the bottom of the art. This be the beginning of Kelganost. Used to be an old keep, a fortress, thick walls, the Northern Watch. 'Twas built to guard against any future attack from the mountains. Then it became Kelganost, city of Ares, god o' war, god o' destruction. Awful place it became. Horrible place. Don't recommend it. Isn't that where your ancient hero died? Ravziz inquired. The more Rultin spoke of Canonea's history, the more she remembered from her own studies of these lands, and the more curious she became. "Aye, yes," said Rultin. "Rodin Halfelven. He died on the shores of the Crystal Sea near the end of the war. Kelganost was supposed to be his when it was declared for expansion, but he ne'er lived to see it. Now others took it over, and they rule still to this day. 'Tis because of them that the city be what it is. Things would have been different if Rodin survived and were made king. 'Tis likely that he wouldn't have chosen Uriz to be the city's patron. But here we are. Each of our 7 cities adopts the characteristics of their patron gods. Gleamin Dolgithad, for example, with its marble walls and thriving farms, city of Apollo, god of the sun. Beautiful city, wonderful people. Passed through there when we tried taking you both to the elves in Amedia. 'Tis one of our liberation routes." The more Rultin spoke, the more questions were conjured in Ravses's mind. She felt as if she could talk to Rultin all night. "What about Thessal Dargad?" she asked. "Who is their patron deity?" Rultin shook his head in disgust as he walked over to hand her the glass of wine. "Don't recommend that place either. City of Hades built mostly underground. You only see a fraction of the place on the surface. Blink and you miss it when travelling o'er the East Mare. Dark place, gloomy, obsessed with other worlds, realities, afterlife and undeath. Not for me. Ugh, I get the shivers thinking o' it. Why do you even ask?" "I met someone recently. She's a downcast," Ravsesi said. "Thessal Dargadan Thieves Guild. Be they here? In Coast Haven?" "Hells, that's odd," he said. "Yes, I think we interrupted some operation they were conducting here. They tried to capture us. I don't know if they were the same people who kidnapped us the first time, but the driver of the wagon that they put us in, I think she wasn't with them. They hollered and went on about how she wasn't going the right way. She was the downcast. Alice was her name." Rultin studied her intently, his deep, thick brows crumpled together in the middle of his forehead with worry. Finally he lifted his drink and gulped it down before pouring himself another. "Bah! Coast Haven's dangerous at night," he said. "First thing everyone learns when coming here for the first time. Ne'er know what'll jump out and hit you." He suddenly crouched and pounded his feet loudly onto a round rug on the wooden floor, his hands splayed out toward Artor, his eyes open wide. "Whew! Like that, you see." He then laughed and regathered himself. Both Ravsesi and Artor jumped at the old man's prank, and Ravsesi checked to see if she spilled wine on herself. But she quickly identified the old man's jest and let out a sigh. "Ha! Got a rise out of you, didn't I?" Rultin said, pointing at Artor. Someone alive in there, after all. Yet Artor receded back into himself, watching Rultin distantly, impassively. Rultin then moved around the study, quickly lighting more lamps as Piecora entered from a nearby hall that led to the front of the bookstore. A crow came flying in with her along with Hero. Both perched on top of the highest shelves in the room and watched the people below. Piecora said, while pointing behind her as she entered, "Do you ever get concerned about all these crows back there in the shop? There must be dozens in here at all times." "Eh? Ah, the crows indeed," said Rultin. "They be my's and ears when I sleep. Shinshaw tribe. They come from the top of Erith Aknom, Sarda's peak, highest in the range. We have an agreement." Piecora marvelled at the crow above and said, "Are you being serious, or is this another one of your comedies?" "Very serious indeed," said Rultin. "And don't tell anyone what I told ye. Nobody needs to be nosing round up in those mountains. I probably shouldn't have said anything." "Well, I've circled around the shop and I don't think we were followed," she said, breathing heavily. "Rultin, thank you for being so kind this late at night. We've had more than enough adventure for one evening." He waved off Piecora's gratitude with a dismissive hand gesture. "Oh, if you were followed, we'd have known by now," Rultin said, pointing his thumb behind him at the crow above. Then he lit the final lamp along the wall, illuminating a large room filled with piles of books, desks, chairs, large rolls of parchments and canvases that lay in various piles that Ravses assumed followed some Byzantine organisational structure unknown to her, or perhaps anyone except for the old bookkeeper. A large wooden carving of a bear standing on its hind legs, in mid-roar, stood in the corner with several items of clothing draped over its head and forepaws. "Nah, much of this be my fault, Piecora," Rultin said as he turned and placed his lamp onto a nearby ornately carved wooden desk. "Haven't been forthright with ye, and now things are catching up with us. Many pieces be moving on the board tonight. Need to hash it out." Piecora stood there in the doorway, shifted her weight and said, "No, you haven't told me everything that you know, my old friend. What is going on? What's troubling you?" Rultin walked across the study to Piecora and handed her a steaming wooden mug. "Spiced cider, made right hot. Your favourite," he said. "Even poured it in a Xianjian Plu. Rough cut, ne'er cleaned. Just how you like it. Ne'er say I ain't authentic, at least for me friends. I don't even know how you can drink out of that thing, but Xianjians be Xianjians." Piecora cupped the simple Xianjian clay mug with both hands, held it close to her face and breathed deeply its rich aroma. Thoughts of Xianjia when she was a child came rushing back to her. The wooden mug, made from the poorest Madarum tree found only in Xianjia, was infused with years of previous droughts of cider baked into it. Washing a properly made Plu was unthinkable to Xianjians. The older the mug, the richer the flavour. She slowly strode further into the study after him, luxuriating in the thoughtful gift from the bookkeeper. "Vopin oltielde, a mugful of home is what we call it. You could disarm a dragon with this batch, old man," she said tenderly while looking down at him. "Or make it pee out its arse for a week," he said, shaking his head at her. He gulped down his wine, then turned and wandered back across the study to the bar. Piecora moved over to the ornate wooden desk, shifted some of the mess over with her hand, and sat on it with one leg raised. Rultin glanced over his shoulder at her and quipped sarcastically, "Just make yourself at home, why don't you?" "Is this a map of the realm?" she asked, clearing things away from something that caught her eye. "If by realm you mean the whole country, yes. Don't spill anything on it. Worth more than all else in here," he replied, now with a refilled glass of dark red wine. "Spirits, it's beautiful," she mused. "Who made it?" "Someone up in Alagost. Don't know the name. Map makers, they rarely sign their work. Pity. Don't even know how I came by it. Could be years if you have the gold, which I happen to know you do after your last run. Serpendis made sure of it, he did." Piecora laughed and said, "Oh, he told me I could purchase any map I wanted if we made it back here alive, and even to come see you for it." Then she said sadly to herself, "But I guess he didn't make it back, did he? I still sometimes wonder if I'll hear his voice inside my head again." She fidgeted with the hatchet slung on her belt. She never told anyone about Serpendis's fate from their previous adventure together. They would never believe her. Sometimes she found the tale hard to believe herself. "He was right," Rultin said. "Lot of maps in here. Maps of all kinds. Look around. You know, when you be having some free shopping time." "When I settle down, I will do that. Hold on to them for me until then," she said. A pleasant quiet settled into the room as Rultin, Ravses and Piecora drank and basked in the comfortable presence of trustworthy others. Autor, his head leaning against Ravses's leg, drifted off to sleep. Finally, Rultin set his glass down on the ornate wooden desk that Piecora used for furniture and said, "All righty, we're all exhausted, so let's get caught up and get some sleep. Piecora, you're welcome to stay here. I'll put Ravses and Ortur into the museum. Nobody'll get to them there." Piecora recounted to Rultin all of the events that happened earlier that night, from when Vinexi first showed up at the knife's edge with Ravses and Ortur, the ensuing fight with the mysterious assailants, the revelation of Alice, and the presence of the downcast in Coast Haven, and the discovery of the statue of Serpendis, where the hostage wagon finally came to rest. Rultin huffed. "Oi, that's indeed a lot for one night. Had you fill o' Coast Haven yet?" he asked Ravsese. But Ravsese said nothing, deep in her own thoughts. "Rultin, we need to get them out of here," said Piecora. "It's really not safe." "Oh, if only you knew how right you were," said Rultin gravely. "Let me fill ye in with some things I've learned lately." He lifted from his shirt pocket a long pipe and began packing it with a sweetly pungent leaf. "I know who's been chasing ye," he said, leaning over a lamp to light his pipe. "Turns out there be Muthan agents here in Canonia. Somehow word got to them, and they been trying to find you. But they weren't the ones doing the kidnapping, the first or second time." He looked at Piecora and asked, "Know the name Hector Ganta?" "Not at all," Piecora said, shaking her head. "Vlanstradan royalty, a real character. Utter garbage. Of all places a scum like that could hole up, 'twould be Vlanstrad, one of the 7 cities far to the northwest, city of Athena, law and order, home of the Nespero Thieves Guild, who we get along fine with, and all that. He'd fit right in, here in Coast Haven, but nah, he's up there in a northwest corner of the map, dining with both the temple and throne of Vlanstrad. He's untouchable there, and he ne'er leaves. Hells, if he showed his face round here, I'd put a hit on him myself. Make sure he ne'er made it back home alive. But nah, he has his own agents doing the business for him." "What does he have to do with us?" Piecora asked. He waved a hand in the air. "I get sidetracked sometimes when my blood curdles. You see, I don't know how to put this politely, so I'll just say it. He raises kids into gladiators for the Canonian Games that come around each year to each of the 7 cities. They think it's a noble cause up there in Vlanstrad, that he be running an orphanage for runaways. Nah, truth is he sends his monkeys down here to Coast Haven and captures the kids, locks them in cages and brings them back to his barracks, trains them up to fight for our entertainment. Turns around and calls them runaways to the powers that be, so he takes all their grant money, including from the Games Commission itself. Can you believe it? One of the worst people this country's produced, and he's right under their noses up there, living like a king, making money from sponsorships, charitable donations, grants from the throne and the commission itself, and even the winnings from his fighters. Worst part is, some of his fighters are thankful for the life he gave them. They only know the gladiator life. For some of them, it worked out well, I guess. But they don't know where they come from, the families and friends they had when they were kids, all forgotten. Gah, I could crack nuts with my toes when I think about it." "This man sounds monstrous," Piecora said. "Perhaps one day I'll meet him. It would be a bad day to be alive for him. But I still don't understand how—" "Someone made a deal with the monster to take the boy and his mum when we ran them to your media. Someone knew Ravsese and Orta were coming here on the old wave-breaker, and they knew where we'd be taking 'em and when. We were ambushed just outside of the farms round Dolgithad. We lost a few of our own, but we scrambled, called in some help from some of our affiliates, got the Nespero involved, and got 'em back, before they could reach Vlanstrad. Think they maybe underestimated us." He lowered his voice, stopped waving his hands and said, "Our network is compromised. All of the routes are being watched. That's why I hired ye, Piecora. I need you to take 'em east o'er the wildlands, as far away from here as possible. They'd be crazy to follow you. You're the best guide there is, and I trust ye with all o' my heart. I know Serpendis loved ye, and I loved him as a brother. I wouldn't be putting this unscavian mother and child in anyone else's care." Piecora slowly moved her hand to brush away more scraps on the desk, revealing another map beneath the one of Canonia. The map underneath was topographical and showed more of the world beyond Canonia's borders. She stopped her fingers on where Siena would be, several weeks east of Canonia, according to the map's scale. But nothing was drawn or inked between the two countries, just blank paper, and Piecora knew why. The wildlands were considered unmappable, for they were constantly in motion, always different with each visit. Sometimes you could even see the terrain moving if you sat still enough, and for long enough, or you might feel it and hear it in the earth if you pressed your ear against the ground. Rivers changed course, lakes changed shape, mountains rolled on, and forests marched along in a constant geological dance. The very clay was a swirling marble cake of intermingling densities, structures and elements, as if still molten from the world's creation. Only those experienced with the wildlands could effectively guide anyone willing to pay for their services, and Piecora was considered the best guide of them all. Thus, she was called properly the Sagery Guide. From years of travelling over the wildlands, she developed an intuition for the ever-changing lands, as well as finely tuned methods of observation and adaptability. In many ways, it was her home, for she was outcast from Sagery society thanks to her soul-bonded relationship with Hero, the small deadly raptor who always flew near her and whose eyes she could see through. She could never teach these skills to someone else, as they were simply ingrained in her. Her own survival depended on them, therefore so did her clients. Serpendis, a wealthy merchant from Coast Haven, had been her most recent client. She met him in Sagery after his caravan was slaughtered by the Banwar elves who lived further east of Sagery. He alone escaped the carnage. He hired her to get him back home to Cananaya, spending the rest of his travel money on her fee and the necessary supplies for the trip. Things started off well, but roughly a third into the wildlands, things turned sour, and their ensuing adventure was so incredible, so outrageous, and the stakes were so high, that it left her contemplating her own retirement when she finally returned to Cananaya. Serpendis never made it back home, as he died during a part of the story that she knew no one would believe if she retold it truthfully, so she kept the nature of his death vague, attributed to unfortunate consequences. Vinexi also knew the real story, for she met Vinexi during this adventure and wound up taking him back to Canonia in Serpendis's stead. By the end of the ordeal, she and Vinexi became close friends. Nowadays she would trust him with her life, as he entrusted his to her while in the wildlands, but she knew he would never return to the wildlands again. The city was his home. "What do you propose?" she asked Rultin. "The tapestry has already paid my fee, but I'll need gear, supplies, horses." She looked over at Ravsisi and asked, "Can you ride? Can he?" Ravsis shook her head. "No, we've never ridden before." "I can teach you to ride. If I can teach Vinexi, then I can teach anyone," Piecora replied. "The situation be different than what you're used to, lass," said Rultin, walking over to Piecora. "Do ye think ye can just have a sunny afternoon in the park with the horses and the boy and his mum? You're the Sagery guide who takes the wealthy across the wildlands. They pay you from their pocket and off you go. When's the last time you had to help someone escape the city who had no money to their name? The tap paid your fee, but it ain't cheap." "Fine, I'll do it for free," said Piecora sternly. "I'll do it for the tapestry and for Serpendis, and to help these poor souls who only want to live their own lives. Had I known everything in the beginning, I wouldn't have asked for payment in the first place." "Nay, nay," said Rultin, waving her off. "We're professionals here. You're getting paid and no haggling on your worth and expertise. Sides, we're paying you to do what you do because this is what we do. We get 'em from Muth and find 'em to safety. Ultimately, they be our charge." "Well then, we both need to think about all this differently," Piecora said. "If you need to get them east, all the way to Sagery, that's an expedition. Who's going to pay for that? I can cover—" At that moment, Vinexi came in from the front of the shop, waving his arms above him at several harassing crows. "Rultin, get your dogs off me!" he snarled. Rultin whistled a few quick chirps, and the crows dispersed back to the Sagery's front. Vinexi took a moment to shake out his cloak and remove his hood. "What are you doing here? Where's Alice?" asked Piecora. Vinexi lifted his head and looked around the room. His goat eyes drifted over Piecora and lingered on Ravsais, and he smiled. "Precious, a beautiful young mother and her boy. I've been sent by the rat to take them. It's not safe here, old man. Eyes are watching your Sagery, and they know that these two are here. Is there another exit besides the front door?" Ravsais slowly stood up and roused Ortor from sleep. Rultin, flustered, said, "Well, you know where the exits are, my boy. You're in the rat, remember? Why up—" Vinexi looked at Piecora and said, "Come, let's get what we need tonight and be off before dawn. Are you ready to go?" Piecora, equally flustered as Rultin, said, "I thought you would never return to the wildlands. What's changed? Why now?" "No time. Come, you lead," Vinexi said, reaching out to Piecora's arm. But Rultin snatched Vinexi's wrist before Vinexi could grab Piecora's arm and yanked it back toward himself. "Hold a moment, lad," he said lightly. But there was something menacing lying underneath his tone. "Let's see your hand for a moment, will you?" Vinexi whirled his head around and beamed ferociously down at the old halfling bookkeeper. "Unhand me, dotard," he seethed deeply. Ravsisi detected something different in Vinexi's voice that reminded her of boiling water. In a flash, Rultin dragged a knife blade across Vinexi's palm. The deep cut bubbled and curdled like thick phlegm disturbed by a stick. Vinexi whipped his hand back and hissed in sudden malice, but his face was no longer Vinexi's. Instead, his once beautiful features shifted and congealed into a single, featureless mass of wet, soft clay, the colour of molten flesh. Ravsais stared in horror as the thing that was once Vinexi jumped back into the doorway and drew a pre-loaded hand crossbow with its other hand. As the crows returned to harass the grotesque simulacrum, it brought the crossbow to bear on Rultin. But then the arm went flying and spinning into the air, cut off at the elbow by Piecora's sweeping hatchet. Fleshy ooze splashed into the air and spattered onto the wall. The tumbling crossbow's bolt fired into the ceiling and stuck into one of the wooden rafters. Before the Vinexi copy creature could react, Piecora followed through her sweeping hatchet with a forward lunge from a low squat, her powerful legs crouched beneath her, and driving her sharp antlers into the cloaked midsection of the simulacrum, she pushed the creature into the side of the doorway with a dull, wet thunk, its feet leaving the ground beneath it. A cavity opened within the centre of the blank grey face of the creature, and from it a terrible concussive sound came as air and bile were suddenly forced upward. Piecora drove her antlers deeper into the thing's muscular yet amorphous body, pinning it to the doorframe as she came back down with her hatchet and sliced into its bent left knee. In a flash of feathers, Hero was on its face. His talons dug deep into its roiling flesh, and with several strong wing beats he lifted himself forward, following his momentum, and tore thick globs of slime and meat from the thing's head. Piecora pulled her antlers from the creature, and in the same motion before its feet could land on the ground, she swung sideways with her hatchet through the thing's neck, separating it from its flailing body. Both fell in opposing directions and landed like damp mud. At the same time, the small crossbow clattered onto the ornate table covered in valuable maps and various documents and oddities. A soft, wheezing sound continued from the open cavity within the oozing head as its life slowly melted into the floorboards like watery slip spilled from a potter's barrel. A thick, grey, caustic smoke that smelled like nothing natural from this world rose from the body and head of the creature, swirling around the dark rafters above and escaping through the many windows just beneath the ceiling of the shop where Rultin's crows came and went. All at once, the crows erupted in flight and fled the shop through the windows from the hideous and poisonous smoke. Ravsais once again balled herself around Artor and covered his eyes. Piecora leapt toward them, stood between them and the smouldering creature, hatchet ready at her side, and feet planted wide apart, her posture low and ready to lunge with her antlers. Rultin slowly stepped toward the black cloak, covering the mound of boiling, gelatinous remains of the creature. "Eyes indeed be watching this place," he said darkly, as he nudged the cloak with his shiny black shoe. He then looked at Piecora, Ravses and Autor, and with fear in his eyes that Piecora had never seen before, he said soberly, "Add another enemy to the list of those who be after ye." Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.